Hello, this is co-writer and director of Logan, Jim Mangold. I'm going to try and hit as many different kind of points about the film, production-oriented, philosophy about the film, stories about making the film as I can as we go along. There are moments I might set back and let a small piece of a scene play and then chime in, so don't lose patience with me if there's a little bit of a pause. After finishing The Wolverine, Hugh and I looked at each other and were faced with the question of whether we would make another film, particularly one that might bring the curtain down on his character. And facing that challenge and each of our own sense of exhaustion with the default settings of these kind of movies, feeling like these films had gotten slightly repetitious, not just Wolverine films, but superhero films in general, I was faced with trying to figure out how to do something different, something deeper, something that would feel very final and complete. And the first line of thought I had about it all was just, what is Wolverine frightened of? What is Logan afraid of? It seemed to me that whatever his final story would be, he should be faced with the thing that unnerves him the most, the thing that frightens him the most. And I thought about and went through the lore and the comics and thought about different supervillains. I thought about the kind of ever-rising stakes we see in movies of this ilk in the last decade. The world is going to blow up, a city's going to blow up, the entire existence of humanity is at stake, the galaxy, and thought none of that would really frighten him very much. In fact, Logan might very much look forward to the end of the world. So what was it I thought that really scared him? And the answer that came to me was love. Love scares him. Intimacy scares him. Being dependent on others scares him. Being vulnerable scares him. So I sat down and started to construct a story that would somehow subject him to this most frightening of prospects, which is family. Having a father he had to care for, and even a child who he would have to own paternity and ultimately love. That's where the idea first came, that he could be caring for an ailing Charles Xavier. At first I had them living in a Kentucky bourbon mill before we moved it to the border of Texas and Mexico. And it's where the idea first occurred to integrate X-23 Laura into this story and introduce her as someone who was very much in need of his help and would help drive the plot of the film. The choice to explore love, for me, it was important that it was a kind of very pure love, family love, as opposed to romantic love. Because A, I think we've seen that before for Logan, but B, there is something forever, untouchably permanent about the love one has for their parents or their children. And the burden of that love and the weight of that love is more challenging for a character like Logan to deal with than his feelings about a particular girlfriend or romantic love. Anyway, that's how we got there. That was the start of it all. I wrote kind of a, 60-page treatment that was essentially, as I described it to Hugh in the studio, a kind of very bloody road picture, like a Little Miss Sunshine meets The Gauntlet or Unforgiven. Hugh was very focused also on making a film that had a more naturalistic vibe. We both in our discussions talked about movies like The Wrestler, Little Miss Sunshine, Paper Moon, a lot of 70s films, a lot of films which very much contradicted the kind of hyper-edited sonic blast that has come to define, in the new millennium, the tentpole movie. We wanted to make something more paced, a little more modest, smaller in scale. This first sequence of finding Hugh as an Uber driver was something that occurred to me fairly early the idea of him having a kind of dead-end job and seeing a parade of humanity in his back seat. Scott Frank, my writing partner on the film, had the brilliant idea of this opening scene where he wakes up and his tires are being lifted off his car. His car is getting jacked up, and we see both his rage and power when he defeats them, and also the fact that everything aches, you know, that there's a kind of weariness to him, a kind of damage to Logan that we're setting up from the very beginning. The other idea that occurred to myself and my collaborators, and among them Scott Frank, Michael Green, who are both also writers on the film, and our producers, Hutch Barker, Simon Kinberg, and the many others involved who too numerous to just start listing on this commentary. And the one idea that was really critical was also a sense for me that Logan was exhausted with being Wolverine. I mean, that's one of the reasons we call the movie Logan. It's about the man, but it's also about a man who's tired of this persona and all the responsibility and heroism and expectations that come along with it. So you can see that we went to fairly quick work here, establishing Logan as a man who is living in some level of anonymity, hiding from his celebrity as a hero, and trying to just live a more modest life. Modest and grim, because we're also seeing that he is buying drugs on the black market. A little bit of a misdirect here in this, that we're in a way setting you up to think that these drugs are for him, and slowly the onion will unwind and you will see that he's bringing medication home for his ailing father figure, Charles Xavier. Boyd Holbrook is an actor who I've long admired, playing Donald Pierce here, and was going to work with on another film that ended up not happening, and I was thrilled that he could join us here. Again, my intention was to try to undermine the sense that villains, quote-unquote bad guys in this movie, all need to be kind of chewing up the scenery and gnashing their teeth and ripping holes in the fabric of time and tearing sets apart, that we might be able to build a sense of reality to both the protagonists and antagonists in this film if they're all played a little more naturally, even more playfully. When I'm directing a film and I have characters who are playing bad guys, villains as it were, I think one of the things you can really do that hurts your film is just encourage the actors to act, quote, bad or, quote, evil. It's my theory that in the history of mankind, as well as in movies and plays, that no one wakes up in the morning and says to themselves, how can I screw up the world today and hurt as many people as possible? That in most cases, unless the character is truly sociopathic, they wake up with an idea that what they're doing is for the better of mankind, even if it's terribly misguided. And I think that makes more interesting villains, characters who are not emitting some kind of bad actorly idea of evil with every move they make, but instead are just marching forward and playing their own agenda, which happens to be in opposition to our heroes.
My car.
You know, I know what you're hiding, amigo. The old cue ball south of the border.
What do you want?
A little cooperation. I'm a fan, by the way.
Fuck!
One of the things we laid out, and we're doing it both visually and in the writing here, is a kind of careful unwinding, unraveling, as we reveal Logan and his situation. We start with him in the middle of the night, in the middle of his work day, as it were, then show him making a drug buy, getting confronted by people who seem to recognize him, and finally, at this point, 10 minutes into the film, arriving at where he resides, in the middle of nowhere. The point of all this, and I think the point for me very much, is a slow reveal of a hero that we've come to know one way, and that we're revealing another way, living in more desperate and grim circumstances on the edge of the world. Similar to what I was saying about Boyd Holbrook, Steve Merchant's arrival in this movie is again another character where I'm really attracted to a unique character, a unique energy, and someone who can bring to the film a sense of life and humor and warmth. I think Steve plays this character in a way that really implies that he has tremendous affection for both Logan and Charles, and a lot of concerns that Logan is in denial about their crumbling world.
I've had a rough night.
When you're casting, you're looking for people that, in a way, make the most interesting stew possible. Contradictory rhythms, contradictory humor, any way that the actors can actually have a kind of natural rhythmic difference. It's almost like they're musicians that play, one's playing jazz, another's playing classical, another's playing rock and roll. You want to have this feeling of these rhythms clashing.
You're not listening. You've been asking questions again. About why we're here. I think you're trying to read my mind.
That's what these are for.
Miss Muffet.
This was a very early scene that we wrote. In many ways, we kind of figured out the film writing this early scene between Charles and Logan. It's as close as we come to any exposition about where the world has been. We understand that there are not many mutants left in the world and none have been born. We also understand why they're hiding out here, that clearly Charles is not in control of his incredibly powerful brain, and that much of the reason that Logan is living here out in the hinterlands on the edge of the world is to protect Charles from being captured and to protect the world from the dangers that Charles' brain can inflict. This set, the interior of the water tank in which we're keeping Charles, is one of our most beautiful sets, I think, kind of simple but really evocative in several different ways. When I first thought about where to start our story, as I said earlier, I was thinking about starting the film in a Kentucky bourbon mill. The idea was always that Logan would keep Charles in some kind of tank. I liked the idea that a tank might have echoes or reverberations that remind one of Cerebro. I also liked the sense that it's a kind of, chamber, as close as he can come, metallic chamber that might help contain the danger, have some practical sense to it. When Francois Audouy and myself, he's the production designer, started to examine how we could use a water tank or bourbon tank or any kind of tank to keep Charles, of course, immediate things come to mind. One is that if it's a water tank, usually those are incredibly high in the air on long legs. And I remember the day that Francois and I were sitting in the production office playing with a model, and I kept thinking about, oh my God, every time you see Charles, you got to climb a 200-foot ladder. That's not going to work. And then suddenly we just tipped over the model of the tank on its side with the legs sticking out like some kind of dead spider. And it hit both of us that this was the solution. My only concern was, would there be a hatch they could climb in? And Francois informed me that usually these things have hatches at the top from which they're filled with water. So we tipped it over, and it became this kind of giant inverted tank lying like a kind of great dead dinosaur on the desert floor. Francois then worked it, imagined what rust and age would do to a tank like this, creating these little, star fields of light that come through the dark walls when the daylight penetrates from the outside. All of which both beautiful to the eye and also evocative of Cerebro.
Statue of Liberty was a long time ago, Charles, a long time. There are no new mutants, understand? Hasn't been a new one born in 25 years. Not anywhere. I've always thought we were part of God's plan. Maybe we were God's mistake.
When people ask about the rating of this film, given that it's a rated R film or adult-rated film in other parts of the world where they use different rating systems, they assume that my attraction to making the film adult-rated was for the kind of violence we could then show in the film and also whatever blue language or sexual references we'd have in the film. And in many ways, all those things were attractive. I think many fans were dying to see a Wolverine movie where his rage, berserker rage, and the power and destruction that his claws can cause to human flesh could be made more visible on the screen. But my biggest attraction to an adult rating on the film and getting the studio to agree to it from the beginning was a little more complicated than that. When a film is rated R or adult rated around the world, it means that the studio is not going to market the film to children any longer. No Happy Meals, no tie-ins with toy companies, and the obvious recommendation that this is a film not for young kids. Well, what does that change for the filmmaker? It's a really interesting question. What it changes is suddenly no one's reading the script on the studio level or the marketing level and going, that scene between Charles and Logan in the tank is 6.5 minutes long. That's too long. No kid is going to sit through that. Or no one's going, can Logan have a funny little robot friend or a funny little critter or someone that could be living with him in the desert that we could keep the kids excited by watching? Or I think it's a little much talking about these themes of death and drug addiction and hopelessness and a sick dad with a degenerative brain disease is a little much for kids. My point I'm making is that the rating, when a film is rated for adults, it means that the film can be filled with adult ideas. Not just graphic stuff, but actually the ideas of the film are allowed to be more sophisticated because you're no longer having to pace up the movie, edit it faster, make it more charming or colorful for a 9-year-old's attention span. The film becomes what I had hoped for, and I think what very much Hugh Jackman was hoping for, which was a comic book film for adults.
I don't want to fight, but there's things we need to discuss.
What things?
Well, would it be considered nagging if I was to repeat my previous observation that the dose is too low to suppress the seizures?
That's what the guy gave me. I wasn't in a position to make demands.
Well, I almost died this morning. That seizure
It was barely a minute.
It felt a lot longer than a minute. I couldn't breathe. You're less affected. You know he needs a higher dose. And I know you've got more money squirreled away.
The money's to get us out of here.
No, not us. You and him. You're saving to buy a sun seeker. Sun is the key word. I hardly see myself cowering below decks like Nosferatu. Do you? Folding your underpants and making him spotted dick.
This scene and the scene in the tank with Charles really set the table for what the dramatic circumstances for our protagonists are. They're low on cash. They're looking for a way out. Logan is contemplating suicide. Charles is terribly unhappy living confined in a bleak world inside that tank. Things couldn't, in a way, get more hopeless. This is intentional for many reasons. If you want to figure out what a filmmaker's thinking, the screenwriting side of the filmmaker or the director side of the filmmaker, for me, one of the best clues is to check in, how do these characters start the film and how do they finish? And what the filmmaker is setting up in the very first 20 minutes is often a very clear setting of a marker from which the hope is that the characters you meet at the end of the picture will be very different than the characters you meet at the front, that the actors will get a chance to carry their roles through a kind of transformation. If Logan is angry, closed off, shut in, self-medicating at the start of the film. The man, at the final moments at the end of the film, is going to be cracked open, full of heart, a hero, and even if it's in his final moments of life, seeing the beauty of life instead of the darkness in it. The other thing I very much wanted to set up was the contrast that the arrival of Laura is going to bring to Logan's world, and that that the effort to create such a sense of grim hopelessness for Logan and Charles and Caliban in the beginning is also an effort to show what's going to change when this little girl in a red trench coat arrives in their lives. In many ways, this movie is a three-legged stool. Charles, Logan, and Laura. And as a filmmaker, you start a project and there are challenges, and the challenges are usually the things you go, how am I going to do that? How am I going to do that? The one real advantage I had here, well, two real advantages I had here were phenomenal actors in the roles of Wolverine and Charles Xavier, actors who had played these roles for a lifetime, but who I also knew personally and knew were hungry to go to some new depths with their characters. The mystery, the question mark, was that third leg of the stool. Who was going to play Laura? And how would we find someone between 10 and 12 years of age who would have the confidence and the power to play dramatic scenes with these two amazing actors, one. And two, another really important thing is that there was a real danger when you were looking at this film as an abstraction in the screenplay form that Laura would come off as ridiculous. Would anyone believe the power and intensity and ferocity of this little kid and her foot claws and hand claws? And I think one of the real amazing things about young Daphne Keane, who plays Laura, and I think one of the things she should be proud of all her life about her performance in this movie, is how well she succeeds at every one of these challenges. A bilingual role later in the film, a silent role in the first half of the film. She has to own a kind of level of physical prowess and danger that is pretty amazing, and at the same time play this kind of very simple 11-year-old waif when you first meet her. When I was talking about earlier, noting where a character is at the beginning of a film and at the end, I think no one in this film has a more dramatic arc, a greater change, a huge journey spiritually and emotionally in this film than Laura. When we meet her, she's this frumpy, dirty little thing in a soggy raincoat, staring upward and watching the world. And when we meet her in the end of the film, in the final frames, she is a woman burying her father and delivering a eulogy with a level of maturity and poignance and perceptiveness about life and its meanings that one never would have expected her to get to in the 2 hours that this film runs. It's really a remarkable performance, and she is an incredible kid. Her parents are both actors, and Daphne comes to every scene focused and ready to be part of the scene. She's not a kid that you have to tell, look here, smile here, laugh at this. She's in the scene with the actors living through the reality.
You don't know anything about me.
Please, I promise. There will be no problems if we leave now.
I can't just leave to North Dakota.
We have to be there Friday.
Or what?
Or we miss our chance to cross. Please. You have to, please. Please.
I always love this scene between Charles and Logan in the tank when he tells him he's going to go away for a few days. Not for the obvious reasons of the plot functions it performs, of just kind of Logan telling Charles I'm going away, but there's a kind of poetry in just the behavior of these men, the feeling that these are lives really being lived. It was a real big goal for myself and my co-writers on the movie to try to evoke a greater sense of humanity and life's real rhythms into a film, even with as much pressure on it as a kind of summer tentpole film, to let the film breathe and to give the characters a chance to be, or to watch their behavior, to learn from the way they do things, small things, the way Charles is pinching the leaves on his little herb garden, the way Logan is fiddling with reading glasses for the first time, playing with his phone. Watching these characters deal with normal life, as well as, of course, dramatic developments like this. We shot Logan predominantly in the New Orleans area and environs around in Louisiana, and then moved for the last month and a half of production to New Mexico, where we shot the exteriors of this set, for instance, the smelting plant where they live, which is obviously not a Louisiana location, but is near Albuquerque, New Mexico. One of the other production challenges of these scenes here in New Mexico was that I had long since lost Patrick Stewart to a stage show he was doing with Ian McKellen in London. We had to finish shooting Patrick Stewart in the first month. So by the time we got to New Mexico, I didn't have Patrick Stewart anymore. And you'll see in the upcoming sequences, we already had shot the interiors of the smelting plant in Louisiana when we had Patrick. But I had to integrate him into a fairly large-scale set of scenes, a couple conventional scenes outside the smelting plant, and then a pretty large-scale action sequence at the smelting plant. And I'll try and point out to you how we integrated him and how we tried very hard to make it feel like he was present with all these other actors in this sequence, even though he never set foot here. One of my favorite aspects of shooting at this location in New Mexico was just the way the silt, the dirt, kicked up when anyone moved. It produced this fantastic and very dramatic effect in the air, just of silt in the air, that evoked for me a sense of great westerns, many of which, as you may know or have detected, were really inspiring to me in the making of this film. My fascination with westerns isn't just the obvious accoutrements of a western, the varmint talk, the six-shooters, the horses, the cowboy hats, the saloons. It's all fun, but that's not what I love most about westerns. What I love most about westerns is their simplicity. I think movies have gotten really complicated with a lot of characters and a lot of plot. Very often I feel like I'm talking to my friends and loved ones for weeks after a movie, still trying to figure out what happened in the movie. What I love about the Western form, also the samurai form in Japanese film, is that the story itself is entirely comprehensible and simple, and you're allowed to get involved in the complexities of the characters as opposed to the complexity of the plot.
You didn't shoot the poor thing, did you?
No, did you?
I asked you first.
I don't like guns.
Of course. I wish you'd called me, Logan. Like I asked. See, you're not the only one that's been enhanced.
Logan! Logan!
That shot of Patrick Stewart is shot in Louisiana. The set behind him, we only really had that metal fence. The rest of it was digitally recreated from New Mexico. This is shot in New Mexico.
Come here.
New Mexico.
It's okay.
Louisiana. 2 months earlier. New Mexico. Louisiana.
It's okay.
New Mexico.
It's okay.
Louisiana.
Come. Ven aquí. Come.
The point being, and then, Stephen coming forward in Louisiana,
It's safe.
and then arriving in this frame 2.5 months later in New Mexico.
Looks like ex-military.
the planning to do that is really just the planning of blocking the scenes in advance and knowing your shots in advance and trying to cover. But I think our visual effects and our team and our production designer did an amazing job of making it completely seamless.
Text me where you are. We'll pick you up.
These scenes were shot early on in the production in Louisiana on our set, interior set that was built. Actually at NASA, just outside of New Orleans, where they build the booster rockets for NASA explorations.
Logan. Hey. Logan.
Hey. Hey. You get it back after I figure out what you and your mother have got us into.
No, Logan.
What?
I think that...
One of the things that I've learned making movies over the years is that when there's certain aspects of character that are enjoyable, you can prolong them. Audiences enjoy them so much. You can stretch them out and keep exploring different facets. What I'm leading up to is that Logan's sense of disbelief, his reluctance to get involved, his own sense of grumpy, gruff self-absorption is something that we really enjoy. You can see him playing tug-of-war with Laura with that backpack. It should be dawning on him that this girl is incredibly strong, and he plays that. But then he keeps moving on, that he doesn't believe she's a mutant, that he doesn't believe she has special talents, that he doesn't want to engage in any mission. I think sometimes when you're first starting out writing scripts, you kind of write your hero as someone who, the second there's a challenge, they just rise to the occasion and jump in. I myself am much more fascinated with characters who hesitate a lot more, who have to be really forced into being their best selves.
You're fucked now, beauty.
So here again, you're going to see a sequence where we're going to be making up for the fact that Patrick Stewart has left us shooting the movie after the first month. So we're on a soundstage. He's being wheeled out.
Stay here.
Where?
Don't move.
Where are we going? Hey, don't worry. He will be back for you.
Then we're on a very small exterior set in Louisiana where he's being wheeled out and he exits frame. Then here I'm shooting a double getting pushed by Hugh Jackman in New Mexico. This is a shot we did in Louisiana, New Mexico, Louisiana, New Mexico. And every time we cut to Charles through the rest of this entire chase sequence, each one of the pieces that involve him are specialized pieces we shot either with green screen or with the building behind him in Louisiana before we had ever gotten to this set and shot any of the rest of this sequence. Here begins our kind of first major piece of action since the very opening of the movie. We've really carried you a pretty long way now, a half hour into the film, setting up mostly character and not really just tantalizing you with action, but trying to pull you in to the predicament of all these people. This is our first big sequence where Donald Pierce, his Reavers, and a contingent of Mexican federales have all landed and put our characters in a real jam.
Logan. Yeah, I'm thinking.
The light is really beautiful in this sequence, and we shot this whole scene from basically this point all the way through Laura finally pulling out her claws. We did it over a series of days between about 3:30 and 5:30 over 3 days because the light was just so beautiful that time of day. You can see it on Boyd here, the way the light is low and catching the dust in the air, and the way the light is hitting Hugh here. It's just really magical. And once we had started shooting in this light, I wanted to really get this sequence in this period of time with the sun low in the sky like this.
Well, I left him the same ditch he was going to leave me in. Jeez, Wolverine, seeing you like this just breaks my damn heart.
For instance, this up and down angle, we were just pushing Boyd and Hugh around, dragging Hugh around to different places on the dirt till we could get the sun to line up behind Boyd and create that great shadow on Logan. In one way or another, I knew that by the time anyone saw this film, they would know that Laura is a kind of mini Wolverine. Word would have traveled to them. So you kind of build the film with this anticipation. I mean, for the first-time viewer who knew nothing, who landed from Mars and just watched this movie, you might wonder why there's so much build-up for this 11-year-old girl at the table. But of course, as a filmmaker, I'm operating from what I know my audience probably already knows, which is that this girl has a kind of power, if not really knowing exactly what that power is already. But I'm playing kind of a dance of the seven veils with it. For instance, we get up to the edge of when something's going to happen. And then we stage it off screen. My next challenge was Scott Frank and I had written this thing where she comes out with one of the Reavers' heads in her arms, but I don't want you to know it's a head yet. So you notice I'm covering Laura from very far away. Here, a wider shot through the legs of the Reavers. And it's not until this next moment when we finally see what she's got there.
That a girl. Hey, baby.
I think Boyd demonstrates a kind of masterclass here in acting. His lines are so simple. Laura, Laura, what did you do? Laura, stay there. Laura, no. But each one of them, he's moving from a kind of cajoling, paternal, friendly kind of attack to suddenly a scolding, authoritative tactic, and lastly, to just letting loose the guns on her.
No. Move! Go!
Daphne Keane is a remarkably gifted kid, as I said earlier, and physically gifted too. Really spry, eager, fearless. But of course, she is 11 years old, and there's some stuff she's doing and some stuff that you have doubles doing, first and foremost for safety. But you'd be amazed how much of this stuff Daphne's doing. Even wire work was one of her favorite things, getting hung from a cable and spinning and twirling. She could never get enough. Most actors I've ever worked with, and I've worked with some very big and super experienced actors, when they have to do wire work or physical work like this, they can't wait till it's over. It's exhausting. I can't remember a day that Daphne wasn't ready for more and eager for more when we had already gotten our shot complete.
Are you that man? Come on, hold her down.
It's also a good chance to talk about the score for this film. When Marco Beltrami and I started working on it, one of my biggest concerns, as you've probably gotten the impression from me elsewhere, was how to differentiate ourselves from what I feel are kind of fairly repetitive strategies that people have used with music and sound in other comic book movies, summer movies, big movies, whatever you want to call them. I wanted a more 70s feel. I wanted more of a kind of thriller or detective movie score, a more intimate score, something that wasn't trying at every moment to bring the London Philharmonic to bear on the action, but tried alternate, different, groovier, cooler strategies that also weren't trying sometimes to be so enormous.
As I told you, Logan, she's a mutant.
Similarly, the photography of the film was something that I was very focused with our director of photography, John Matheson, on, and trying to find a way to make a beautiful film, of course, but also not quite as slick, not quite as polished, and in some ways theatrical or almost plastic feeling as I feel like a lot of summer films have become. The prevalence and the ability to do green screen work on these movies and create any background you want, put actors in front of any background you want through the magic of green screen and matte painters, have robbed movies of a kind of authenticity that I miss, and the films always feel oddly fake, even though the effects work is often amazing in most of these movies. My goal was to make a film that felt a little more relaxed visually, a little dirtier, grimier. The camera work is a little sloppier and more alive. The images feel more like they're happening for the first time, are not so prevised and planned. The camera isn't flying through keyholes and doorways and landing through bedroom windows, doing things that seem impossible for cameras to do. We're essentially shooting the movie analog, like we'd have shot it prior to the arrival of computer-assisted photography and enhancement. I mean, one of the biggest things you feel is that when Hugh is driving this car, he's driving this car. And just the simple feeling of the dirt in the air and the wind in his hair is a big deal. Films really miss this. You know, this isn't a green screen shot of Boyd on top of a pickup truck with a machine gun. That's really Boyd racing through the desert on the back of a machine gun. And these guys are riding motorcycles across the desert, and it's happening. We're staging it. There's just something more real about stuff that's really being mounted and staged than when the whole thing is a kind of put on. I always felt as I was working on this movie that at this moment, in this moment, with Logan and Donald Pierce looking at each other and him shoving Laura back in the car, we've kind of ended the first movement of this symphony. Our characters have been flushed out of their hiding place. We've had a large set piece of action that reveals who Laura is and what her powers are. And we're now on the road, which is going to become the next, mode of the film. A road picture with our heroes. Only what's changed for all of them is Logan is now aware that this young girl is some kind of clone of him with his abilities. And Charles, joyfully, is out in the world for the first time in at least a year and seeing the world, even if it's just through the windows of that limousine, free from that tank and his prison. One of the things that John Matheson and I focused on with the photography isn't just about the frame and the style of the frame, but it's also the quality of the light and how the film is lit. Because I was very unfocused on making my characters look glamorous, sometimes you make a Hollywood movie, part of your focus is making everyone look, quote, their best. This movie, if anything, may have had the opposite goal of trying to make everyone look their worst. But there's two very simple choices you can make with lighting. A kind of glamour, Hollywood-style lighting, which would feature light essentially coming from the front, like when you take yearbook pictures or family portraits at Sears, and you get hit with a big, soft pillow of light right in your face. It helps wash out any wrinkles, hide, facial features that are large or strange, and kind of make everything very soft and pleasing. We did the opposite. I have always found, having made 3 movies with my friend Hugh Jackman, that he looks so magnificent in modeled light. Modeled light being, what I mean by that is side light. Look at Boyd here and notice how he's getting hit mainly by a light that's kind of hitting him in profile. The point being that actors, I think, look great that way, dramatic and interesting. And it also produces a very specific modeled look to the movie. Very severe edge light, a lot of contrast in each of the images. Instead of everything feeling like it's been, quote, lit, it also feels very natural. For those of you who elect to watch the black and white version of this film, which will be included in this package, I think you also will see the advantage of this kind of lighting strategy, because when you make a black and white film, obviously you don't have color anymore to differentiate people from their backgrounds or pull things forward or backward, and so the contrasting levels of luminance of light, the way light edges things, carves them out from the background, carves out people's features, becomes really critical to making a film function in monochrome. And, you know, the idea of releasing a version of this movie, a monochromatic version of this movie in black and white, really was a very organic result of early stills that I was taking in production, and some of which I was releasing on Twitter and online, and I was making them black and white. And I think it startled all of us, because, you know, there's this kind of conventional wisdom that audiences don't like black and white. It seems old-fashioned. But I think audiences have actually traveled somewhere since then and have grown and are always looking for a new angle and a new way to see things. And sometimes the old ways are the new ways. People responded so intensely to those stills that we started releasing that it occurred to us to try to make a black and white version of the film, and fans were clamoring for that exact reality at the same time. But again, my point is that the lighting strategies that John used here with his gaffer, Andy Ryan, were going to yield us some success in a monochrome world, because, again, the lighting is extremely textured. People are pulled away from their backgrounds. The use of light and dark is really sculptural and lends itself to a monochrome treatment. When we made these videos for exploring and telling the backstory of who Laura was and how she came to be, there's obviously a kind of slight play with reality you're doing, given how elaborate or not a nurse might be able to make her video. We tried to live within the idea that there was no shot that a nurse couldn't have shot herself. But obviously the videos, as they wear on, become more and more sophisticated. My hope being that you're getting drawn into the story that Gabriella is telling on that video, and less aware that the filmmaking and the cutting of her video might be a little beyond the level of your average nurse. Not that nurses can't make great films. This begins another moment where we have kind of a series of slice of life moments, if they might be called, kind of moments of mutant existence you haven't seen in X-Men films before. Charles has to pee. Logan takes him to the bathroom. Laura needs another quarter stuck in her kiddie ride. Laura goes into a convenience store, starts to shoplift Pringles and soda. The whole idea here is, as I said from the beginning of this commentary, to explore mutant life and a superhero's life from also the mundane angles, from the realities of life. What's it like to be a mutant child? What's it like to be a mutant parent? How do you control a kid who could slaughter a grown-up when they lose their temper? And you get all the benefits of kind of, metaphorically speaking, you get the benefits of anyone who's ever had a kid who threw a big tantrum can kind of recognize Laura's behavior as only slightly more frightening than their own kid.
I'm not looking.
It's always important in a film, even as grim and dirty and tragic and serious as this one, to have moments of levity, moments of character. A, to give your audience a brief rest from the other tone. Just like music, films need to evolve and change. Can't just keep hitting the same chord over and over again and expecting it to have the same power. Here becomes part 2 of Logan's taking in of Laura's story. The important part of this second piece is that it kind of pulls on his own heart. We know he has one, however gruff he is, and his own awareness that Laura has had a painful childhood, not dissimilar to his own.
As the children became older,
Laura.
they became more difficult. They could not be controlled. The company made their bodies into weapons, tried to teach them to kill, but they did not want to fight. A soldier who will not fight is useless. Inside this building, they are working on something new.
This is our first glimpse at X-24. This is the nemesis that Logan will face later in the film. You just see his arm and a leg in a tank being cloned and some video displays showing him. The idea behind X-24 was to create a challenge and a mirror image for Logan, a kind of deadly force that instead of being an interesting or eccentric character or supervillain would be, again, something on a personal level that would be most threatening to him of all, which is a mirror of himself at his darkest moment in his life. That is, as Weapon X. That Logan in this film ends up facing the thing he's been running from his whole life and ashamed of his whole life, which is the dark things he did in the period of his life when he was Weapon X.
If you are watching this, it means that I am dead. I am not sure if any other children survived. We were separated. There's no more money. That was a lie. She is not my child. But I love her. You may not love her. But she is your child.
What Elizabeth Rodriguez is doing here is not easy. You know, these kinds of monologues and moments where she's speaking to a camera and you want to feel the desperation of someone on the run, someone who knows they're probably going to die doing what they're doing. I think she does wonderful work here. A movie, in my mind, is only as good as its supporting actors. You can have amazing leads in a movie, but if the people who come in and out of the main characters' lives don't feel like they could be main characters themselves, like that they've lived full lives, that if they don't feel real to the audience, there's always a level that the movie can't achieve without all these supporting players having a chance to really shine. You can't tell the entire life story for every character who comes in your film, but what you can do is talk about it with your actors and get them to a place where they're playing a full life, even if the audience doesn't get to see it. You feel this is a fully realized character who's had a past, who's had their heart broken, who's made choices at different crossroads, and not just a character performing a function in the movie, but a real living, breathing human being.
Hey, keep it out front, all right? Come on, let's go.
One of our goals when writing the movie and articulating this journey they go on was to create many different and contrasting stops for our lead characters. You know, that they stop at a convenience store in the middle of a desert highway, that they stop at a very developed casino city and end up staying in kind of luxury at a casino and even end up at a farm. One of the motifs of the movie are hands, holding hands. And in this moment of Laura looking longingly at these mannequins, it's one of the first moments in the film that I'm very intentionally setting up a kind of symbol that will recur in the movie of interlocked hands, holding hands, a parental hand and a child's hand, something that I think Laura's longing for and has never felt.
No. Sorry. Chair. Okay. Thank you. Stand there. Stand there.
You'll see the hands reoccur again when, after Charles is buried, Laura puts her hand on his to try and comfort Logan. And of course, in the end of the film, when Logan reaches out for her as he is passing.
This is a very famous picture, Laura. It's almost 100 years old.
This scene of Charles and Laura watching a sequence from the great George Stevens film Shane was important to me for a couple reasons. One is that I felt like it created just a very real-life moment, much like we all have with our kids watching a movie we cherish that reminds us of our childhood, etc. But of course it serves another purpose, which is that we're going to end up establishing the words that Shane tells the young boy in the film. Late in this sequence in the hotel, we're going to establish the words that Laura ends up speaking at Logan's graveside. When that idea first occurred to us that Laura's eulogy for Logan might be this monologue about murder and the way it affects you and that you can't escape a killing and the shadow that it puts over your life, we needed to set it up. When that idea occurred to us, you need to actually show where Laura found these words. And that's part of the reason we show as much of the film as we do here. It's also because I love this film and have been inspired by it, not just on this film, but in many endeavors. And if you haven't seen it, you should sit down and watch it. It's a masterpiece of golden age American filmmaking. One of the things that occurred to Scott Frank and I in working on the script fairly late in the process was this idea that the comic books, X-Men, Uncanny X-Men comic books exist in our character's universe. It's something that I can't say is completely original. I've seen it in other forms, particularly in the Western Unforgiven, which was an inspiration for us. The Richard Harris character is kind of traveling around through the West, chronicling the stories of the great gunfighters. But this idea of this uneasy relationship that Logan has with his comic books, with his fame, with his celebrity, and the burden that that has put on him, I thought was really interesting when we landed on it, and plays a very big role later in the film because, of course, our heroes are headed toward a destination, Eden, that Logan has discovered Gabriella pulled from comic books. So it's this wonderful tension in the film where the actual place our heroes are headed, they're not even sure it exists, or at least our protagonist is not sure it exists. He's kind of quite sure it doesn't exist, and that what they're on is a fool's errand. Of course, in a weird way, he gets proved wrong. The Eden in the comic books may not exist, but in a way, when they arrive later at this desert location, the children will, in their own way, have made this place into Eden. There's not a lot of scenes in this film where we're cutting away to the villains, and usually they're fairly brief and are just an attempt to keep track. Here we're setting up the idea that Caliban is helping Donald Pierce track our heroes as they cross the country.
Get up! Get your cage, Tracker. You did your job.
Kind of interesting, you know, you finish a movie and you read and hear people talking about your film, and one of the things I've seen a lot in reviews and discussions about this film is the dystopian view of America, that it looks like America after some very dark times have passed. And what's always so odd to me is, A, we didn't have a lot of money to make this movie. We made this movie a lot cheaper than most of these films are made. But B, this is America. We didn't build these sets. This is what it looks like. The reality is that I think people are so used to the way movies clean up and make everything sparkle that what makes people call this movie dystopian is the fact that we're actually just out there shooting our decaying infrastructure the way it really looks. Here's a scene where Logan finds that the address they're headed is one that's actually featured in a yellowing old comic book. This comic book was drawn and written by Joe Quesada, and who is a artist producing the real X-Men comics back in the day. He's still very active in the world of Marvel, but was very generous with his time and helping us recreate period-looking comics that would actually function and look extremely realistic for the fans.
Jesus.
fucking kidding me.
What's coming up is a sequence that we kind of set up, at least foreshadowed in the tank in the very beginning of the movie when Charles has his first attack in the smelting plant and only Caliban and Logan are affected. Here, of course, now it's going to be an entire hotel filled with people. Again, because we didn't have a lot of dough, we needed to find solutions to problems that were more like economical and were ways to kind of create an effect or a visual effect that was different yet cheaper than the normal way you just turn all these shots, for instance, over to a visual effects house. One of the things we did here, and you'll see the way the kind of light in the background of these scenes is streaking and swirling around Logan, is to create the effect of the psionic attack. We used a very simple technology, one that you probably have even in your iPhones and your home video cameras and equipment, which is that many consumer-level products now come with something, you know, that is called a shot smoother or shake reducer or something that helps with camera shake and makes the shot look more steady. It's basically just a computer program that takes the shake in a shot and tries to kind of undo it. What we did is we used that technology, only we shook the camera like mad. So every one of these shots, the camera is flying all over the place. It's on a rope and the operator is shaking it like mad. Then we run the shots through a stabilizer that effectively takes a lot of the shake out of the image, and all you're left with is this kind of pulsing, streaking, smearing light coming off the characters, which is largely just a function of the fact that the camera at the time was being literally vibrated, shaken vigorously, almost like someone was on a kind of exercise machine. And we've taken that shake out, and all you're left with is this kind of warbling, warping imagery left. A lot cheaper than turning the whole sequence over to an effects house in a different mode and asking them from static shots to make some kind of force field or another kind of effect. Again, these moments, these aftermath moments, the kind of human moments of these characters contending with their own predicament, and especially, I think, Patrick, so masterful in this role and so affecting. His own awareness, a man who has spent his whole life trying to help people, help mutants in need, help humanity when it's in need, is suddenly dawning on him that he hurts people.
Shit.
You all right?
We gotta get out of here.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
We shot this sequence. It's not actually at a casino. It's actually outside the Superdome in New Orleans. We just dressed it up as a casino. We try to set up backstory as minimally as we can here in the case of just listening in on radio. And the fact that Logan doesn't want Charles to hear what they're talking about on the radio, which is the last time an attack like this took place, which was a time when Charles hurt many more people.
In point of fact, she's your...
How long has it been since you took your meds? Tell me, how long has it been?
I don't know. 2 days.
You saw what happened yesterday. If that shit had gone on any longer, everyone
I
at the
did
casino-
what I had to do to save
You
Laura.
didn't do anything. You just freaked out and had a fucking seizure.
This scene is very much the culmination of my hope that I described at the beginning of this commentary, that we'd have sequences in which you're just stuck in a car with these superheroes, bickering, dealing with domestic issues the same way any family might.
Boring shit.
I know, Pop. I'm such a giant disappointment.
You honestly derive no sense of purpose from what we're doing.
Okay, what are we doing?
There is a young mutant sitting in our car.
Yeah, I see.
And where we're taking her, there are others. Does that mean nothing to you?
Yeah.
It was the day we were shooting this scene in a car rig driving along a highway in rural Louisiana, almost up the Mississippi border. I have to tell you, it was about 110 degrees. I think it must have probably felt 120 or 30 inside the cab of this car. Couldn't have the air conditioning on because we were recording dialogue. And all three of those actors were not exactly living in the height of comfort as they were doing those scenes. Here's the arrival of Richard Grant's character, Dr. Rice, and finally we see that Donald Pierce has someone above him. Real easy shorthand, you know. Sometimes the way to avoid really crappy dialogue that you don't want to have to hear, like bad guy dialogue arriving and being upset with his subordinate and chewing him out. How many movies have we seen it in? You know, a directorial strategy you use is sometimes just, well, how about we see it from Caliban's point of view so I don't have to hear all those cheesy lines. I can just watch a pantomime that the boss has gotten here. This sequence again becomes a chance to explore Laura's point of view. Instead of just covering the dialogue, my camera is following her, what she sees, her interest in this horse carrier. We've seen her previously in the limousine holding a horse doll that she has in her backpack. Even the unicorn on the cover of her t-shirt indicates a kind of fascination.
Female is both hunter and caregiver.
Good to know.
She uses her front claws for hunting and the back claws defensively.
Oh, yeah?
Thus ensuring their survival.
In this sequence, we imagined a world in which, not unlike what's happening right now, self-driving semis and double trucks own the highways in the future. We obviously don't have those vehicles now, so we used real semi-trailers when we shot the scene and then replaced them digitally with cabless trailers wheeling down the highway at high speed. For those interested in how we did this action with the horses, there are actually riders on all these horses in blue leotards. And then we're removing the riders from the horses' backs, and that's how we managed to get the horses, once Charles closes his eyes and reaches out to them telepathically, we get the horses to actually all pull themselves back onto their marks at the horse carrier.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
So for instance, in this shot, there's two riders on those two black horses. I was very lucky that the wonderful actors who play the Munsons here all came on and lent their humanity to these roles. Again, as I was saying earlier, a movie's only as good as its supporting players, and you really want, in the case of Eric LaSalle and Elise Neal, they add such humanity to their scenes, and you feel the weight, of course, so much more of their demise because you've gotten attached to them, and they do such a wonderful job playing the Munson family.
Well, can we show our appreciation and treat the three of you to a decent meal? We don't live far from you.
No.
That would be lovely.
Caliban is really a very tragic figure in this film. He's kind of the third wheel of the Charles-Logan relationship in the beginning, always feeling like he comes last, yet is holding the fabric of the household together. And then when the Reavers arrive and their world gets exploded, Lee gets left behind, tortured, and used as a method to trail his friends. It might not be a role that it would occur to you to hire someone who's known mostly as being a comedian, but first of all, Stephen's a remarkably good actor, so take that off the table. But secondly, it's exactly that kind of contradiction that makes casting choices interesting to me.
Your colleagues are savages.
I agree. The Reavers were very ineffective, but I'm bringing new tools to bear. I still need someone to point us in the right direction.
No, I can't help you.
Breathe. Breathe. And what does he have, the old man? Alzheimer's, ALS, a degenerative brain disease in the world's most dangerous brain. What a combo.
You want to say grace? Say grace, baby.
Thank you, God, for this food.
This dinner scene was largely improvised. I think the first several lines are written, and after a certain point, the actors are just kind of carving it out on their own, and we were writing down what they were coming up with and then kind of getting matching shots for the new material that occurred. It was really exciting and creative atmosphere shooting these sequences in the first couple weeks of production.
Well, there's plenty more if she wants.
She's fine. Thank you.
This is delicious.
Oh, thank you.
So good.
Where you all headed?
South Dakota. Well, Oregon and then South Dakota.
Something that may not occur to you watching a movie, but when you're doing a sequence like this of people eating food, it is hard on the actors. Imagine spending, we spent at least a day shooting these dinner scenes, I think a day and a half. So literally for 12 hours on one day and 6 hours another day, you were doing nothing but having to eat string beans, corn, and chicken fried steak or whatever it is. Meatloaf. That's right, meatloaf. I'm sure no one wanted to see a meatloaf for a year after shooting these 2 days. It's a testament to the history of these characters and the wonderful rapport that Hugh Jackman and Sir Patrick Stewart have with each other, that they could find their way into improvising moments like this.
Careful, you're speaking to a man who ran a school for a lot of years, right, Charles? Really?
Well, yes, there was a kind of special needs school.
Yeah, that's a good description.
He was there too.
Oh yeah, no, I got kicked out a few times.
I wish I could say you were a good pupil, but the words would choke me.
All that dialogue was just what the actors came up with minimal guidance from me. I was trying to find a way to carve out a moment. Very hard to write on a page because people might go, why do you even need this? But a moment where you feel the family, you feel the love, you feel a life spent together and shared memories. And I think for the audience that has real power, and when pulled off with the precision and warmth that these characters are capable of.
We have a perfectly fine room upstairs for your father and your daughter, and you can sleep in the living room on the convertible.
Catherine, it's very, very nice of you, but
Logan,
we should go.
We can leave early in the morning, break of dawn.
It's interesting, this house is filled with love. The characters are so warm and kind, and in an interesting way, Charles does not want to leave. Laura loves it. But Logan is almost, it kind of gives him anxiety. It's like he doesn't want to stay in a place like this. A, because he knows he's probably bringing danger to them. But B, because it just makes him uncomfortable. And that's Hugh's brilliance in playing this role. Remember, this is like now the 9th or 10th time he's played this part in a movie, that he's reaching so deep and carving out really interesting new facets to this character is still something that he deserves endless praise for. His dedication as an actor and also his interest in this character to keep exploring him. This was always also the riskiest section of the movie, we felt, as we were working on it. Hugh at one point described it as kind of the movie within a movie. The the story of the Munsons. You arrive at this house, you end up having dinner with them, then you find out their problems. They're having a fight with some kind of corporation that owns property next to theirs, fighting over water rights, etc. We get involved in their drama. Whether that would work, whether an audience's impatience with the standard formula, impatience for the standard formula of a kind of a summer movie in which, you know, there's a clear villain and a clear time clock and everything's ticking and your pulse is quick, that the kind of leisurely quality and the kind of humanity and more modest pace of this film, whether people could sit still through it, I think in many ways that's been the most gratifying part of releasing this movie, is seeing that people really can handle something more paced and human, and still respond in large numbers with some enthusiasm. This scene it seems almost very casual in nature, but I think it's a really important scene in the film in which Logan is explaining to Charles that the place they're headed isn't real. It came, as he says, from a comic book. I think that's so interesting, you know, a comic book character putting down the fictional nature of their own existence, kind of seeing themselves as some kind of exaggerated freak, and talking to his father, hoping he can understand that we can't fall for our own press, we can't fall for our own publicity, and that Logan's living in the reality of who he really is instead of the kind of glossier, more exciting depictions that might exist in comic books.
It's not real.
It is for Laura. It is for Laura.
And some rest.
This was a way of doing something very interesting, but also finding a way to get a little distance from the other movies, so that we had permission to kind of occupy this tone, which is obviously very different than other X-Men films.
Who knows? Maybe. Hey, look at them. Look like dinosaurs with their 20-ton bodies and tiny little brains, chucking their cloned up super corn. You know it tastes like shit, too.
Why do people eat it?
They don't. They drink it. Corn syrup. This is those drinks that everyone's having, you know, to stay awake, cheer up, feel strong, sexy, whatever. Used to be a time when a bad day was just a bad day.
Well, they still are.
One of the things I think that Daphne is so successful at in this film is playing both ends of a character. You know, it would have been very easy to just kind of make her this wild child who was incapable of a kind of tender moment. But the idea, very much like her dad, that she is a character who both has this rage and is deadly and lethal with claws coming out her feet and her hands, but is also curious and a child and open-hearted and struggling to figure out her own rhythm in the world and how to exist in it. Also, she's never seen the world, never left a laboratory. This is the first week in her life that she's breathing fresh air.
You like it? Well, here, you can take it for the night, and I'll get it back from you in the morning.
So the idea that someone lent her their iPod and she's listening to pop music and having this kind of normal kid experience for just a moment in a real family home is a kind of shocking moment, a kind of, she's drinking it up. She's so grateful to be there, just like Charles. What comes here now is a sequence with the arrival of Jackson and his men from the Canewood Corporation farm that is kind of a very classical Western scene. You have the visitor, the stranger who has arrived at the family farm in Logan. You have patriarch of the farm in Eric LaSalle, and we now see who is persecuting him, his oppressor, as he tries to make life possible for his family on this homestead, as it were. That there are these bullies, if you will, who are on his case, denying him the water he needs to feed his crops.
Don't worry. We won't need it. Stay here.
Evening, Mr. Monson. Brings you out this way.
Why don't you ask your boys?
Mr. Monson, you understand you're trespassing right now, right?
Lenny Lofton, who plays Jackson, the bearded guy here, does such a great slow burn here. Lenny has been in 2 other films of mine. Again, further evidence that when you meet good actors who can help populate your world with full-blooded, real-life characters and a little bit of color and panache at the same time, you don't lose those guys. You try and bring them back for every movie. Lenny was also in 3:10 to Yuma, playing a banker, tormenting Christian Bale, and he plays an intelligence agent in Night and Day, tormenting Cameron Diaz. I guess he has a theme in my movies of tormenting people. In real life, he couldn't be more charming.
I'm gonna count to 3, and you're gonna start walking away.
I got rights to this one.
1.
I have a lawyer now.
2. 3. You all right, boss?
You know the drill.
Give him a goddamn hat.
Get the hell out of here.
Fuck off.
Go!
You've had training.
Some.
The idea in this next scene is kind of cinematically a bit complicated because it's a very big confessional scene for Charles Xavier where he's admitting becoming knowledgeable and aware of his own complicity in the injury of a lot of the X-Men and a lot of other people as well, and his inability to control what were once his incredible powers and now are a kind of liability and a danger, and the shame he carries about that. Okay, that's one part of the scene. But the other part of the scene is that the person standing in the door listening to him do this monologue is not Logan, as we think it is, and he thinks it is, but is actually X-24. So it's also an arrival of a very dark character in the movie and a kind of sleight of hand we're playing with the audience, that the music, instead of being ominous, there's a stranger in the door, is actually playing the emotionality of Charles's confession. Of course, Patrick is delivering a superb performance, playing it that he believes that his lifelong compatriot, the Wolverine, is the one standing in the door. In many ways, it's only Laura who's kind of aware that something strange is afoot.
Until today, I didn't know. You wouldn't tell me. So we just kept on running away from it. I think I finally understand you. Logan.
One of the interesting things, and a lot of people have asked about, is why X-24? Why not, Sabretooth? Or why not some other supervillain that arrives? And I have to admit, I played with all these other ideas, but the reason that for me and my co-writers they didn't work was that with any more elaborate character arriving, you required a much more set of explanations. What is Sabretooth doing there? Why is he helping Transigen? What is his role in capturing Laura? Why? Why is he part of this? Also, these are more verbal characters, so now they're going to talk. I mean, if Sabretooth were suddenly there, he'd be talking about why he's there and saying something to Charles and saying something to Logan. I'm always fascinated with how I can get to the unspoken place in a movie. How I can get to the place where the movie is functioning as images first and words second. This is truly a horrific moment in the film, with the Munson family getting killed by X-24. The film almost enters the emotional and style space of a horror film. The other interesting aspect for me about X-24 is that if you go back to what I was saying, for those intrepid souls who have made it this far through the commentary, if you go back to what I was saying at the very beginning about the initial impulse to make the movie, and then it's about what Logan's most frightened of, then again, to me, fighting with one of these badass characters from Marvel lore is not the most frightening thing to Logan. The most frightening thing would be having to face himself, his dark self, Weapon X, the thing he's been running from his whole life, which is the horrible atrocities he committed, hepped up on drugs, trained to kill, built with an adamantium skeleton, turned into a weapon, a kind of Frankensteinian weapon, something he escaped from, but which remnants of the memory of it, the sense of what bad he's done in his life, and the blood that is on his hands, like Eastwood in Unforgiven, is a kind of nightmare that haunts him. And to face him with a villain, or an antagonist, if you were, that has no speech to give, has nothing to say about the past, but just embodies his own sin, his own darkness, and also embodies his own power. Meaning, what's more dangerous for a ailing, poisoned Logan than a version of himself that heals much quicker, is stronger, and more agile?
What and how? Oh, shit! Shoot him!
We need to intervene. Well, he only listens to you, Doc.
24! Get back here! Stop! Stop now!
This was the last shot that Patrick Stewart did for our film. And in all likelihood, the very last time he'll play this character.
What?
The Sun Seeker.
I mean, in many ways, this scene is not only about the loss of Charles Xavier, but about the realization for Logan that doom follows him everywhere, and that he's right, meaning the argument he was having with Charles earlier, that we need to leave, we can't stay here, that with them, or even with him, he just brings a cloud of danger, destruction, and death wherever he goes. And that means that whenever he gets attached to somebody or likes somebody and wants to spend more time with them, he almost certainly is giving them inadvertently a death sentence.
Beware the light.
This Logan on Logan fight was a technical nightmare to film, in the sense that it's just complicated. You are essentially staging a fight sequence. One day Hugh is in makeup and dressed as Logan, and another day Hugh is in makeup and dressed as X-24, and you're shooting out the sequence in alternate directions with a double obviously playing whichever character he isn't playing. And then through the magic of editing and visual effects, the characters are married into one sequence. this moment where Eric LaSalle turns to face Logan is a moment I really love in the movie. First of all, you know, if you've been sitting with an audience watching the movie at this point, everyone is in a state of shock. Charles Xavier is dead. The entire Munson family, save Eric LaSalle here, is dead. The blood is running down the driveway, and LaSalle here toys with the idea of putting a shotgun blast into Logan as well. Can't say I blame him. He did bring all this with him. And that feeling that Logan has of his own doom, his own dark curse, is what this close-up was about for me right here. One of the things I'm always after in a movie is to get to a point for the audience, despite how much television and movies we watch and how much we've been raised on stories, that you have no idea where the movie is going. To me, that's kind of implicit in the bargain, is you want me to tell you a story that doesn't just seem like every other story you've ever seen. And what I always love about this point in the movie is I feel like for audiences, they just don't know where this movie is going from here. The kind of mayhem and destruction and intensity of what's gone down has, at least I always hoped, left you kind of wondering how this movie is going to pull itself out of this spiral of violence and darkness and right itself. And that's, as a film director, that's what you want. You want an audience in some way to not know where this thing is going and what lies ahead for these two characters, that if you quiz the audience at this point, they'd be puzzled how the filmmaker is going to find their way out of this story. Q is so amazing in this film. I'm first of all playing two radically different roles. And then in regard to Logan, what an incredibly rich and heartfelt performance it is for him. And so understated. You know, he doesn't have a lot of words. In fact, none in this sequence. It's just looks and glances. And it's a very important thing to remember as a director, I think, is how much you can do with how little. For instance, you know, I'd suggest you just watch this next scene. The only words spoken in the scene are, "It has water." He says it twice. It's got water. That's it. And the rest is just the power of a character who can't find the words. There are no words that can describe how he's feeling.
Well, it's got water.
The point here is obviously just the power of these actors, and particularly Hugh Jackman and what he's doing here. But there's another point, which is that we're trying very hard to contradict the tone and pace of other films like this that you've seen, we've all seen, that we're sitting in emotional spaces with these characters, comic book characters, but nonetheless trying to make them human. That was our mandate. That was what we set out to do. And the danger was that we'd get indulgent in some way, and perhaps some think we have, or that we'd lose your focus, or you'd get bored. My hope, and I'm eternally grateful to my actors for this, is that what they're going through is so interesting in a different way, not the normal summer movie way, but in a different, very emotional, powerful, lifelike way, that you get mesmerized in a different way by a different special effect, not, you know, an aircraft carrier sinking or a city exploding, but just raw human emotion and sincerity.
Welcome back. I was starting to think I was going to have to tell that nice little girl out in the waiting room her daddy's gone.
This actor's name is James Handy. He's, when I found out he's available to play this role, I was thrilled. Just because he's a very good actor, but he's also in a favorite film of mine, Sidney Lumet's The Verdict, written by David Mamet, starring Paul Newman, plays a client of Newman's who's incredibly upset that Newman, who is a drunk in that film, is mishandling his case. A really powerful performance. And again, as I have now said probably 5 times through this movie, the reality of a movie like this, when you're moving from one town to another, meeting people, is the ability of my cast to arrive for smaller roles. They're only going to appear for a moment, but to create a feeling, a fully lived feeling of reality in the shoes of each of these characters. And that is really, once again, just in the hands of this wonderful actor, James Handy. And there he is. His work is done. This sequence, when we shot it, was deeply startling for the crew. We had been shooting about a month or so with Daphne, and she hadn't spoken a word on screen yet. And many of the crew, hadn't experienced anything of her other than this kind of wide-eyed, mute creature. And then suddenly we shot this scene, and the other side of Daphne comes out, and I think no one ever looked at her the same way on the crew after this day.
I don't know how you got me here, but, thank you.
De nada.
Yeah. You can talk? You can talk? Fuck. Well, why the fuck? What's all this bullshit been for the last 2,000 fucking miles?
Sobre nada que hable contigo si me insultas, si me gritas,
What?
si me intentas agarrar.
Okay, shut the fuck up!
Jonah, Gideon, Rebecca, Delilah,
Who's that?
Victor.
Who is that?
Jonah, Gideon.
Who is that?
Jonah, Gideon, Rebecca, Delilah, and Victor. North Dakota.
Where?
North Dakota. Por favor. No, por favor.
Please. Okay? Your nurse, she read too many stories. You understand?
So suddenly, this young woman who has been existing without words for well over 90 minutes in the film is a fully living, breathing, fire-spewing speaker, making demands on a weary Logan and pushing him to the very edge, to the point where she even smacks him when he won't cooperate.
And they just turn it into a big fucking lie. That's all this is. No.
Look at all the colors that Daphne explores in this scene, pursuing what she's after. She wants him to take her to Eden. She yells at him. She tries to charm him by smiling. She shows him evidence. She shows him maps, how short the trip will be. She shows him the storybooks that show him a hero in the comics. Why won't he do what it says in there? He refuses, and he refuses, and he refuses, until she pulls out her one last tactic. Wolverine is faced in Laura with another mirror, different than X-24. This one, another tortured soul, but one who, if they have to, will resort to violence to get what they need. And this is a scene in which she bullies him into taking her where she wants to go. And I think the really interesting thing always watching it is that we really enjoy it.
We understand the importance of containment, Dr. Rice, but you can't leave a war zone behind like you did in Juarez.
Yeah, try to remind yourselves that these were all little killing machines. Machines who would have happily disemboweled your family.
Not all.
Who told you what these assets off-board, dead or alive? Are you changing my brief?
No.
All right, then. Save tissue from this one. There's a good tracker and had a high IQ.
Watching Boyd here, you know, again, even giving him just kind of human moments to be piecing himself back together after the disaster that was the Munson house. These scenes, again, are very economical, light on dialogue, and really just about the villains finding the next step and understanding where they're going to have to go. It's kind of the last real cutaway we have. We shot this on a lonely country road in rural New Mexico. And again, not green screen, they're really driving.
Hey.
Deja que conduzca. Let me drive.
It's kind of amazing because long after I finished the film, about when the trailer first appeared, people began sending me visual material. Fans started sending and posting visual material from a video game called The Last of Us that had two characters, you know, a kind of bearded, grizzled, world-weary man and a young girl riding in a car together, even featuring some of the shots, although obviously they're not exactly the most original shots in either case. I mean, meaning raking shots inside a car is pretty much all you can do. You can either shoot people from the front or the side. But nonetheless, and seeing this incredible parallel between this very popular video game and our film, I wish I could credit The Last of Us with something, but I had never played it or seen it. I don't even have a PlayStation, which is the only platform it's on, until I got it when people started talking about it. And it's a great game, by the way, but it didn't really influence the way I shot the movie. But I'm proud to share the iconography with them. What's funny is people are now asking me, oh, would you make a Last of Us movie? And I'm like, well, no, I think I kind of did. You guys made that clear to me. It would just be making one of these over again. For those of you concerned here, when Daphne gets behind the wheel, she's not actually driving the car. It's actually a kind of super old silent movie era trick. When she starts the car up on a count of 3, we just started dollying the camera to the right to make it look like the car is pulling away. She's sitting still. And then we cut to a stunt performer of ours driving the car away. For people interested in writing or directing movies, I think one of the most important things that people like myself have to think about a lot, but is not often discussed, even in film schools, I find, is point of view. And what I mean by that is that we all know when we read a novel, there's a point of view. Who is the narrator? Is the narrator omniscient? Are we hearing the voice of one of the characters describing a memory or something they're living through in the present tense? But in movies, there is also point of view, meaning like, for instance, right now, I'm in Hugh Jackman's point of view. Every shot, I'm close on him as he wakes up. I see what he sees, the sun shining through the windshield. I stumble through the dirt and the grass with him here. I see Laura from a distance, his distance. Camera is his distance away from her. I'm close up on him. I see what he sees on the hillside, these children. And then when he collapses, the scene ends. The point I'm making with this is that a lot of times what I tend to find is unfocused about movies or falling flat is sometimes the fact that the movie just seems to not attach itself to any one character. And that can cause story problems, which may or may not be interesting for you to hear about, meaning you just don't know who the story belongs to. But it also makes the movie visually less interesting, because when you're following a character's point of view, it suddenly helps define how you're going to shoot it and see the world, and gives you limits and parameters to work inside, how you're going to visualize how they feel about the world, what they see, and how they see it, how he takes in these children for the first time, their faces all looking down at him. Everything speaks to me through the idea that I'm doing this sequence from his point of view. When you don't do that, where the camera goes and how you stage the scene suddenly becomes a lot more generic. You just start shooting people acting from handsome directions, but you don't have a sense of an emotional point of view for the scene. Again, this is another sequence that's very much from Logan's point of view. You have all these shots of these kids, but they're all shots that are radiating from his position on that cot. Hey.
Where'd you get that?
Where we came from. They gave it to us when we would fight. It makes you stronger.
It makes you crazy is what it does. It'll kill you.
Not if you use it in small doses.
This whole feeling of children in an adult movie, children in a film that has adult themes, is something that is a really deep memory of mine from the 70s when I was growing up and going to movies with my dad. I would see these fairly tough, some of which rated R films, that featured really powerful performances from children. Some of them humorous, some of them, but that the performances were more sophisticated than children's films today. They were darker or more interesting, more illuminating in some ways for me. Among these movies, I'd think of the John Wayne film The Cowboys, where he leads a kind of cattle drive with the assistance of a bunch of 14-year-old boys. Bad News Bears, Paper Moon, even Jodie Foster's incredible performance in Taxi Driver. There was a period when themes of childhood and childhood performances were integrated into very mature themed movies. This scene here is an example of a child and adult talking about pretty heavy stuff. She's confronting him with a bullet that she finds he's carrying, and she waits for his explanation until he finally levels with her that he's been carrying that bullet for a very self-destructive reason.
You know what it is. It's made out of adamantium. That's what they put inside of us. That's why it can kill us. Probably what's killing me now. Anyway, I got this a long time ago, and I kept it as a reminder of what I am. Now I keep it to, Actually, I was thinking of shooting myself with it.
As a director, I think one of the things I try and be focused on is to never encourage or push my actors to enter an insincere space. Sometimes, to the great frustration of some of my other collaborators, I certainly think my sound men I've worked with over the years must get driven crazy by how low and quiet I'll allow my actors to play. And unlike some sets, I absolutely forbid the sound man from sending word that I need a little more level. You know, I just won't let him do it, because there are magical moments. It's one of the few things I think movies can do, is they can create these moments that we have with loved ones in bed or in quiet moments in a hallway or a room, where we speak in hushed tones, where the scene is so intimate, and that the camera is there feels like we've been invited in on something forbidden from us. And the second the vocal level increases and the performance gets a little bigger, it feels like acting. I don't feel like it's this magnificent secret that I've been let in on. So it gets very important for me to encourage my actors to confound my sound man, to ride the absolute limit, because I really do think it affects the performance and makes it feel more like life. This is a sweet scene and a humorous scene, but it also fits into a larger theme, which is that Logan has been hiding from his heroic self, from his iconic image as displayed in the comic books he disdains, in the hero that people keep talking about how they're a fan, a Wolverine fan. He's hiding from Wolverine. And while he was asleep, these kids literally went to the point of trimming his beard into a Wolverine mutton chop. It's like he's being inexorably pulled toward being the hero he doesn't want to be.
You need to get out. We're leaving tomorrow before dawn. We're going to cross the border. It's a safe haven. Same coordinates?
Yes. Between noon and 5, satellites are blind then.
The kids we cast for the children here in Eden and at the laboratory in the beginning, what was most important for me is many of them, of course, be Hispanic, because we're playing that a lot of these kids were raised via test tube and grown in the bellies of Mexican girls. But beyond that, beyond them being Latino, I was also looking for kids who embody a kind of naturalism in their acting, who are easy and tough and have had it hard, and you feel a kind of edge to them. I wasn't looking for the kind of kids you'd hire for most commercials, cute and button-nosy and cheerful and precocious. I was looking for kids that had kind of an edge, who had to grow up too fast.
Inside. Laura told me all that you did for her. She was lucky to have you. Take it. She says it's yours. It's why you did it, right?
Yeah, well, look, I don't need it. You do, okay?
Suit yourself.
It's an interesting energy at this point in the movie. Logan is kind of alone, left with this pack of children. And he doesn't know what to make of where he's headed.
Your friends, they seem nice. Kind of reminds me of... Hey, what's going on? Huh? You're with your pals. You made it.
Where will you go?
You're his bar, for starters. Hey, I got you here. That's all I signed up for. Even gave back the money.
Such a nice man.
Hey, I never asked for this. All right? Charles never asked for this. Caliban never asked for this. And they are 6 feet under the ground. I don't know what Charles put in your head, but I am not whatever it is you think I am, okay? I only met you like a week ago. You got your Rebecca, your Delilah, your blah, 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 whatever. Everything you asked for, you've got it. And it is better this way. Because I suck at this. Bad shit happens to people I care about. You understand me?
Then I'll be fine.
I didn't want to talk over that scene. I love that scene between the two of them. I'm proud of it as one of the co-writers of it, and I'm also proud of just both actors are just so magnificent and understated in this scene. As we look at Laura here standing in twilight looking out at the mountains, I think the thing to contemplate is how much this girl has changed since the one you met at the beginning of the movie. But also how much things have changed in her relationship. This is a girl who's being pulled along by her wrist in the first act by Logan. And now she's a woman and he's the child. And she's lecturing him. She's teaching him. She's expecting more from him. It's time for him to rise. She already has. One of the things I have to speak about is how proud I am of the visual effects team on this movie, because for the very reason that we've gotten almost 2/3, 3/4 through our commentary and we haven't talked about them. And what I mean by that is that I really wanted a movie where you didn't think you were watching a movie with visual effects, where you just felt like you were watching a movie. And to the degree that the claws and the blood and some of the other big action is enhanced or assisted through visual effects, I really wanted it to be transparent. I don't want to be calling attention to it, both in the way we use our camera and in the way we do the visual effects. I wanted it to be as integrated and unshowy as possible, and that you'll never going to be sure you're watching something, anything but something that's real. It felt to me like we needed a moment in this movie where we carry the idea of Logan wrestling with his heroic persona to the maximum. We turn the volume up all the way and allow him an opportunity to be the Logan we've longed to see for the whole movie. Albeit he has to use a full jar of forbidden drugs to get himself to that place. But that he ends up injecting himself and we end up getting a vision of Logan in his glory. A kind of vision of him as the killing machine that we've always heard about. And I think it was important to get that idea in the movie, but we can't end there. That's not a triumph in a way. It's kind of a tragedy that he has to kind of pump himself full of this chemical and get himself to a place where he can be as great as he once was. And obviously there's a cost to it on the other side. That kid can run. All these kids really gave. These kids really, I mean, they're running at high speed. They're getting pushed around. These kids really wanted this stuff to work. Every one of these kids is a really gutsy performer and really giving everything they can, trying to play the edge of being a child, unwanted by anyone, on your own, running wild, trying to get to someplace you can be free.
Before they get to the border.
Called this shot coming up Logan's Run. Took us about a day and a half, 2 days to make that shot. We shot this sequence in a woods in northern New Mexico, really on the Colorado border of the Rockies, called Chama. The woods are called Chama, Native American name. And it was hard. It was a hike to, you'll probably see if you watch the making of documentary, it was a real hike just to get to set every day. We couldn't even get the trucks, other than the few military vehicles, onto this place in the set. A lot of old growth trees, and as we learned, a lot of thunderstorms. And whenever, for safety reasons, whenever you have a thunderstorm while shooting, and there's any lightning within 5 or 10 miles, you have to evacuate the set and take cover. And you can't go back to the set until 30 minutes past the last incident of lightning in a 10-mile radius. And it made it very hard to shoot we were very often in the middle of scenes or sequences and having to break because suddenly there was just these clouds would come out from behind the mountain, and suddenly you'd be inundated with thunder and you'd have to take cover. We also were at such high altitude that you really have to hand it to the players being physical here, because there was very little oxygen in the air.
Get behind me.
You took all the medicine. It's wearing off.
This is our one opportunity in this sequence, what's past and what's coming up, to see Laura and Logan fighting together, father and daughter. That's essentially what we've gotten to here now. He's here for her. He's here to protect her. He's here because he loves her. And he's speaking to her as an equal.
Go to your friends. Go. Laura. You'll know when.
This sequence is really complicated, a little deceptive in that it feels kind of simple, basic, just a fight in the woods if you want to look at it that way. But there's a lot of different levels of action going on here. There's Logan and Dr. Rice and Boyd facing off in almost this kind of gunfight face-off in the center of this wagon train of vehicles. You got Laura sneaking around the backside of these vehicles and finding purchase somewhere to launch an attack. You've got the children held captive by the second Jeep with the two gunmen standing over them. And of course you have X-24 waiting inside that truck. And you'll see how we play out many cards, set up the cards and then play them out slowly through the sequence.
He makes it sound more brutal than intended. The goal was not to end mutant kind, but to control it. I realized we needn't stop perfecting what we eat and drink, that we could use those products.
I think the thing I always try and keep in mind when staging action is not just what cool things can happen, but how your hero's intentions can get complicated, blocked. What obstacles can you come up with? So he kills Dr. Rice and maims Donald Pierce. But now, of course, Donald Pierce has another card to play.
Showtime, boy!
And Logan ends up hurled into a door and smashed on the ground, and finds the energy to pick up that door and have one card to play for himself. Here's one of the few scenes, however brief, where we see X-24 does have some kind of emotion, almost like a Rottweiler or a pit bull. His only affection is for his dead master, which inspires him to reverse the situation with Logan. And now it's Laura's turn on X-24. It's very basic action. It's very primal. That's what we wanted. I thought that's what audiences wanted in a way, was that instead of cities exploding and the spectacle and scale being so large, that there was a kind of primal Braveheart, Gladiator, blood and guts level to what we had felt from Wolverine in the comics, and the potential for him I mean, these are characters with knives in their fists. It would seem logical that the action would essentially be a kind of a street fight ultimately. Not magical, not majestic, not epic, but blood and guts and very, very intense. Here we're seeing all the different kids' powers getting displayed, albeit briefly, in the destruction of Donald Pierce. Meanwhile, there is one very dangerous mutant still left to deal with. The only time we set up Richter's powers, Richter being played by Jason Janeo right here, is the very brief clip in one of Gabriella's videos where you see him moving masonry blocks in his room. Here he's doing something quite larger.
Go! Go, go, go! Go! Get out of here, go!
The interesting thing is that even to the end, Logan sees himself separate from these children. He doesn't see himself joining them. He sees himself again as a kind of curse. Someone who must stay behind because he will only bring trouble if he comes. I also found it, it's a very interesting psychological question, the idea of doubles, doppelgangers, your bad self, your good self, mirror images. They run all through literature and through many movies of mine. Copland, Stallone's character, has a kind of mirror in this character, Babbage. Lisa and Susanna in Girl Interrupted. Bale's character and Russell Crowe's character in Yuma. Here, what I find so interesting is now that Laura has destroyed his dark double, a kind of vision of his most evil, wrong self, there's a kind of instantaneous transformation that Hugh goes through here in this character. There's something more open, less affected, less grumpy, less guarded. Obviously he's dying, but there's also just something like his soul has been cracked open. And even though it may only be the last minute of his life, he gets to experience that last minute in a way that not any of his life has ever been experienced. And to the end, we're maintaining this metaphor with the hands, intertwined hands, father and daughter. It was very important to me that this last moment for Hugh, however tragic it is on the surface, be in a way ecstatic meaning joyful, that there is, that as he's going out, what he's experiencing is something, well, as he says in the beautiful line written by Scott Frank here, as he says, so this is what it feels like. And I don't think he just means dying. I also think he means love. We shot this scene in the last 45 minutes of daylight that we had in our entire location schedule. When the sun set behind this mountain, 45 minutes after this, we were done with the movie. The idea I had where Laura crosses to his grave and turns the cross into an X it was inspired by many things. My dad's a painter and has had a series of paintings called the Plus series and the X series when I was a child. So I have a very ingrained sense of the relationship of the cross and the X. But also there was a great cover on an X-Men comic, I believe from the 80s, where Logan is kind of affixed to an X, almost like a crucifix on this mountain of skulls. Anyway, all these things hovered in my mind as I thought about a last gesture, a non-verbal gesture, which we could bring the curtain down on the film. Ultimately, with poetic gestures like this, it's really not the idea that's so valuable. I'm happy I thought of it, but it's not the idea that's so special to me. It's if the idea is in the right place that it plays, that an audience is willing to embrace the idea and take it in and see this in a way as a moment of hope, even though they've lost their hero. As the tail credits play, I'd ask you, even knowing that there isn't an extra scene waiting for you at the tail, to take a moment and take in all these people's names and the names at the front of the picture as well. There is no one here who didn't work their ass off making this movie. We didn't do it in the comfort of a soundstage. We didn't do it. A lot of it was nights, staying up all night, bug-infested, heinously hot nights. Our cast, our crew, everyone involved worked their asses off, all out of a kind of dedication to say goodbye to this character in a way that he deserved and to push their own creative selves, because they're really proud to be working on this film, and I'm really proud to have worked with all of them. There's too many people, as you can see, sliding past us right now, to thank everyone. I see Sheila Waldron, Stella, our script supervisor's name going by. I have to thank her. She's been with me for so many movies and helped me on so many of them. But the reality is that you can't thank everyone, but you have to try to bring them all back, because nothing is more valuable to me than a great crew. A lot of this crew have worked with me on other movies before, and what happens, especially when you're trying to make a movie cheaper, is that the ability to have a shorthand with your crew and that they know what you like and know how to set up what you like really helps get things done faster and cheaper. Thank you so much for listening. I am really impressed if you made it this far. I try to do my best to just kind of give you a sense of everything that I'm thinking about as I watch the film. It's only been a month since we finished it, and so the movie is still even a kind of very still plastic wet experience for me. It still exists. It's not fixed. I'm not even sure how I feel about it yet. I need to get some distance, but I know I'm proud of it and proud of the incredible group that made it. And at the very top of that list, I put Hugh Jackman, who I've shared 3 films with and collaborated with for 3 movies, and who continues to grow, shock, surprise, and illuminate me with every movie I make with him. I think this is one of the great performances of his career, and so startling that would come playing a comic book character, but at the same time not startling, because life is always about surprises, and about where something amazing comes from is usually the place you least suspect it. Thank you for listening. Be well.